So thank you all for being here. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for Meridian and all they do for the community and all the communities they service. I could try and go through all of Ryan's accolades and all of his stories, but there is a video that describes it much better, and let's go ahead and show you that right now.
When you're little, you dream you can do anything. Some dream they want to be a doctor, an astronaut, maybe a cowboy. My dream was to be a professional athlete. So how did I get here?
Here's a throw by Leaf, an open guy. Look at that play.
I remember the day when I decided to go to Washington State. It was the greatest 4 years of my life. I played in the biggest games. I even played in the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl. I was on top of the world. I was meeting my heroes
Ryan Leaf,
on the cover of magazines.
The second choice in the draft, the San Diego
And the second
Chargers.
player picked in the 1998 NFL Draft.
University, Ryan Leaf.
Then one day, I started to lose control.
backside pressure and goes down hard.
Time, flings it deep, pass intercepted.
That dream slowly started to slip away.
What about that guy Ryan Leaf from Washington State? He's got to be right.
Troubled former quarterback Ryan Leaf has been arrested.
Leaf was accused of burglary and drug activity. In a plea deal, he pled guilty to the charges.
Former NFL quarterback Ryan Leaf was arrested Friday in his Montana hometown.
Ryan Leaf has been arrested for the second time in just 4 days. This is Leaf's latest mugshot.
I'm both humiliated and embarrassed with the situation, not only for myself, especially for my family.
Quarterback Ryan Leaf was sentenced to 10 years of
The
probation.
strange story of Ryan Leaf has taken another turn
with a plea deal
By customs agents.
His career was the epitome of a
Quarterback
bust.
Ryan Leaf has been arrested.
Leaf was indicted in May in Canyon, Texas.
What was I supposed to do? Just give up? Today I try to use that nightmare to benefit others. My life's purpose is much clearer when I just work to help. The truth, even when it's hard, sets people free. Change is one of the few constants in life. The question is, are you changing for the better? I'm Ryan Leaf, and I'm just like you.
Alrighty, how we doing? Whenever I see the bird fly away, I always think like there's going to be a stamp that says like Viagra for commercials, and I've seen it a million times. So, just incredibly grateful that I'm here. I met the people at Meridian 2 years ago in Muncie, and the first real serviceable item they talked about was dealing with mothers in addiction and the process that went with and how they applied that and helped them, and it mended my heart over these things because of the judgment and the stigma that exists. And when they asked me to come back to be a part of your community, of course I jumped at the opportunity. That's what this is all about. I think that everybody has a choice to do the healthy and positive and right thing. We just tend to go the other direction a lot of the times, and you had a choice today to come here and be a part of your community in a way to give back and to be part of the solution. And that is incredibly impactful for somebody like me who didn't realize or know that there was anybody else out there when things were bad or when things got so awful that I chose to be dead than to be part of my community or somebody else's community. So thank you for the opportunity. This is simply my story. You know, not what to do, not what not to do. It's my story. And I hope that someone in here can relate to it, or someone you know can, and we can change lives because of it. I am from a relatively small town in Montana, a lot like Richmond, Indiana. And to give you a size differential, I am the only Montanan who's ever been drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, ever, right? So there are more first-round draft picks in the Manning family than the whole state of Montana, ever. So I was incredibly unique. I'm not a person who believes that you're a product of your environment, because if that had been the case, I would have never ended up in a prison cell. I was raised by two amazing parents. My father is a two-tour Vietnam veteran who raised 3 boys and started his own business, was full of integrity and character. And my mom was a registered nurse who worked in labor and delivery and delivered babies for 30-some years. But when you are in a small town and you are head and shoulders better than everybody in anything, there's a pedestal that starts to elevate you. And you start to discover that consequences are not as dear when you mess up or misbehave, simply because of what you could do on a baseball diamond or a basketball court or a football field. And I started to develop this idea that I was better than everybody else. Not just as an athlete, but a better human being because of what I could do athletically. And also, I worked incredibly hard. And I competed like crazy. I tell people I was a drug addict long before I ever took a drug. And my first drug of choice was competition. I had to win at everything. And if I didn't, I'd want to run it back immediately and embarrass you in the process. That's how I won. I wasn't a popular kid. Usually the star quarterback, star athlete's pretty darn popular. I wasn't. I didn't drink. I didn't use drugs. I'd show up to parties with a 6-pack of 7-Up, and I'd look at you like you were a morally corrupt person if you did any of those things. And I treated people as such because I felt ostracized. I felt less than in the eyes of them, and this is how I dealt with it. Now, my mom, of course, watched and saw all this play out. She saw how poorly I dealt with things, or how I dealt with things. And she knew that if ever I was placed on any sort of national scene or where everybody could take a hard look at her son, it was not going to go well. But it continued to go well. I got recruited by everybody you can imagine in college. Not just for football. I would go on and play baseball, basketball, and football at Washington State my freshman year. I just wanted to compete. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't want to go to class. I didn't want to do anything else. I just wanted to compete and win. And luckily for me, I was around a great group of guys, a wonderful coach who convinced me to go to Washington State and do something that hadn't been done in 67 years, and that's win a championship and go play in a Rose Bowl. I was also a Heisman Trophy finalist. Never has happened at Washington State. Probably never will again. I finished 3rd behind a guy named Charles Woodson, Peyton Manning, and ahead of a guy named Randy Moss. Those are 3 Pro Football Hall of Famers in that class. How incredible. And I should have won it. I was the best college football player in the country that year. So anybody who could take a team from Washington State to a Rose Bowl in 67 years deserves the Heisman Trophy. And that's like, that just should be a prerequisite. We can't give it to anybody else. This guy went to a Rose Bowl 67 years. So, and then as a junior, I chose to go play professional football, and I was drafted 2nd overall at 21 years old, and I was given $31 million. I liken it to giving a 13-year-old $31 million. There was an arrested development for me that when that pedestal started to rise and people understood that I had this golden right arm, like my development ceased to move forward. And it didn't have to. And I see it a lot in professional athletes. They are incapable of dealing with life on life's terms, but are amazing athletes, right? There's only 24,000 of us ever to play in the NFL. That's it. In 100 years of football, only 24,000. There's only 1,000 who have ever played 8+ years in the NFL. 1,000 people. When those numbers were told to me, I just couldn't believe it. And I was going to get the opportunity to do it. And I jumped out of the box and was incredibly successful. Won my first 2 starts. No one had done that since John Elway in 1983. And then I walked into a buzzsaw in Kansas City, and I would play the worst football game of my life. I was embarrassed, I was humiliated, and I was terrible at dealing with failure. Though I'd failed many times in my life, I'd always thought of myself as an incredible success. I didn't realize the people that had supported me along the way, that when I did stumble and fall and fail, how I dealt with it. And I would go on and play in the NFL for 5 seasons, which is double the length of an average career. But I can honestly tell you that my career ended after that 3rd game, if you can imagine that. And it wasn't because of how I played at all. I played horribly, yes. But everybody has that rookie moment. Everybody has that game that goes, oh, welcome to the NFL. It was how I dealt with it. And when I speak to groups all the time, I talk about life and how life isn't fair. For anybody, whether you're a starting NFL quarterback or somebody who works at the local grocery. Life sometimes is just not fair. It's how you deal with it that matters. And this was the perfect opportunity to deal with it in the most healthy way. And I simply did it. I did it in a way that was toxic and negative. And before there were any viral videos, I was in the locker room after the game, just, sitting down in the dumps because of how I played. I was so angry with myself. Everybody else who had so many expectations for me, mine were much higher than anybody else's. I wanted to be the best that ever played the position. And it was how I dealt with it. I got hit in the head by a cameraman, and I completely dressed him down in our locker room. It wasn't his fault, but he was the closest thing, and I let him have it. A reporter reported on it in the paper, and I saw it the next morning. And when we got in on Monday, I pulled him aside after our little press conference, and I asked him, hey, we're going to have a long relationship. We're going to be working together for years. That locker room's a sanctuary. Can you please respect that part of it for us? And he understood the situation he was in at the time, and he felt he finally had some power, I guess, and baited me into something, and I just lost it. Like I'd always done when I tried to show people that I was the one in charge, right? I was an intimidating person, 6'7", 250 pounds, and I picked him up and I threw him in a chair, and at that time a cameraman in the back corner flipped around and caught the rest of it on video, me yelling at this guy like a petulant child, and having a shirtless Junior Seau come in and pull me out and throw me into the shower. And that was a caricature of who I was. The next day, my dad was in town. He helped me craft an apology, but I've seen the video of that apology, and I read it, and I almost like crumple it up and just toss it into the locker. I didn't want to apologize, right? I thought the guy was an asshole, so I was the one who was right. And then from that point on, it was a constant fight against the media, my teammates, everybody. To go from the most loved and beloved player in San Diego to the most hated in a matter of 2 weeks is incredibly traumatizing. It's first world problems, but still it affects your behavior, your feelings, all those things. I would bounce around from team to team throughout my career, but nothing changed, right? There was always an issue, no matter where I went. And I tell people all the time that I was the problem. No matter where I go, there I am. That's the best way to put it. Unless you make a conscious shift and change in your behavior and the way you think, like nothing's going to change. It's how you deal with it. And I believe that I was a success no matter what anybody else said, because I had these 3 things. I had money, I had power, I had prestige. And all the money you could imagine, which gave me the power and the prestige of being a starting NFL quarterback, was the greatest thing that anybody wanted. My peers, everybody. my last stop was with the Seattle Seahawks. And I had started to develop this sense of sadness. I couldn't get out of bed in the morning, and I felt lazy. And I remember going into his office, Mike Holmgren's office at the time of the Seattle Seahawks, and telling him none of that, but rather just saying, hey, I'm fed up with being beat up physically, mentally. I quit. And the irony in that, of course, is that's what I'd wanted to do since I was 4 years old. You guys saw the video, the innocence of the young boy and his football and everything. And because I wasn't capable of looking him in the eye and saying, Coach, I'm sad all the time. I can't get out of bed. I feel incredibly lazy, and, can you help me? I just said, I'm done with this. I'll walk away from what I thought was the problem, the football, the world that exists around that. I would have hoped that if I had done that, he would have looked at me and said, Ryan, let's get the help you need and figure it out. And maybe I'm the starting quarterback for the Seahawks in the Super Bowl 40, right? But I didn't, because I'd never been shown that path. Growing up in Montana around the cowboy culture and then the locker rooms of college and the NFL, I know for a fact I have never seen another man say those words. Say, I am hurting here. Can you please help me? And if I haven't seen it or ever been shown it, how am I supposed to do it myself? We were tough, strong football players. We don't show what I think a lot of people have judged and stigmatized as weakness. So therefore, I had no path to go down other than to keep it hidden, walk away, because I still had what I thought was success. And that was still the money and the power. The prestige would have a bit of a tarnish on it, but hey, one of 24,000, right? Still give me a free beer at the bar that night. People still know me. And I think that was more important than me than anything, was the fact that people knew I was still rich and famous. It was relatively new to what a narcissist was, but I was definitely a narcissist, right? I'm the individual that walks into a room like this and thinks, please don't recognize me. Please don't recognize me. And then like 15 minutes later, I'm like, why the hell isn't anybody recognizing me? That's the definition of a narcissist, and I was it. When I walked away, I thought everything would be okay. Of course you do. You just think a geographic change or occupational change, life gets better. But I was the same person. I dealt with life the same way I'd always have. And also, my name wasn't going to go anywhere. I was drafted alongside arguably the greatest to ever play. And every April, my name gets brought up. Now, somebody who cares a lot about what other people think, when his name gets brought up every April in a negative tone, one of the biggest busts ever in the NFL, that can be incredibly damaging to somebody who has such a fragile ego, and it certainly was. I just assumed it would go away. I also didn't understand and know what the public reception would be, and sure enough, I was in Las Vegas, a place I'd like to go because I felt like I was anonymous. And I could kind of be inhibited in what I do and go about my business, and also show people that, look, it's the famous Ryan Leaf. He seems to be doing great. But I always had blinders onto it, right? What everybody else was seeing was like this crazy dumpster fire that it was moving through life. And we were at a event that night, a boxing match, and the announcer was announcing celebrities in the audience, and it was Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods and Charles Barkley, and the stadium applauded, and the MC announced my name, and the whole MGM Grand just booed and hissed. And it's not like that hadn't happened before, right? You play professional football, and you walk into an opposing team's stadium, and you get booed, which is fine, and you're wearing this armor, helmet, shoulder pads, and it almost emboldens you in a way. In this moment, my addict mind, because I told you that I was a drug addict long before I ever took a drug, told me that not only were you a terrible football player, but you were an awful awful human being. That's the way I interpreted it. And so that evening, when I was about to walk into post-fight parties, where there were Hall of Famers and Super Bowl champions, where I always felt less than and judged and a lot of fear, an acquaintance of mine offered me some Vicodin. Now, this is the first time I'm going to mention drugs because it was the first time that it really came to me in a way that I chose to abuse it. I was introduced to Vicodin early on in my career in college. I have had 15 orthopedic surgeries from every joint and you can imagine in my body. And after every surgery, I was given this medication, an opiate painkiller. And it's exactly what it's called. It's a painkiller. I was in extremely acute physical pain, and I was given this drug, and it worked. I also enjoyed how it made me feel. But soon as I was able to start rehab and get back out there to compete, I stopped taking the medication. But I knew exactly what it was. And that evening, that acquaintance gave me a couple Vicodin, and I mixed it with the alcohol I was drinking that night, and I felt none of that judgment, that fear, that less than. It didn't make me feel better, but it didn't make me feel anything. And I think I had been searching for that for so long, just not to feel anything. And I walked in and out of those parties the rest of the night and felt none of it. And I saw this as a answer. And for the next 8 years of my life, it was about chasing that feeling of not feeling it. The judgment of others, the failure of not meeting expectations of being a bust, all those things, the human equivalent of real life for anybody else on a magnified level because of the publicity. And this was my answer. I was living in a beautiful $1 million home that I built in San Diego overlooking the ocean, but instead the drapes were drawn every day, and my immediate thought was, do I have pills, and if I don't, how do I get them? At first it was incredibly easy, right? I'd go to physician friends of mine. I was beat up for a living. I had the scars, I had the MRIs, the x-rays to prove it. And then, of course, I would manipulate the relationship any way I could. If they had kids, I'd offer them some autographs, things like that. Before I knew it, a physician's given me a prescription for 90 pills with 5 refills. And I just thought I was maybe doing the wrong thing, but maybe doing it the right way is the way I justified it to myself. I'm doing the wrong thing the right way. Didn't know a drug dealer. I wasn't on the street buying heroin or using needles or things like that. This was just my life now. And the scariest part of all that is that, I'm okay with this. This is my life now. And that's okay. This is just how I will get through life and how I will do it. And I also didn't think anything was ever going to change, right? I thought this is the way it was. But like anything, especially when we're talking about addiction, your tolerance becomes incredibly unmanageable. When you're making $5 million a year and you coincidentally decide to quit that job and are getting paid $0 a year but still live a lifestyle to make everybody think everything's okay, that money goes away in a hurry. And when you no longer can go to the doctors and get the prescriptions and all the things like that, and they start to ask questions, that starts to dissipate. And before I know it, I'm back in my hometown where I'm supposed to be the hero, the only Montanan ever drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. But instead, I'm living in a mother-in-law's apartment house back by an alley with relatively no money or anything to sustain me. Having been caught a couple times by doctors, by law enforcement, and being slapped on the wrist, waking up every morning once again thinking, do I have pills? And if I don't, how do I get them? And the ends justified the means for whatever that was. I could not feel what I was feeling. Through the process of the cycle of addiction, you have all this guilt and shame about who you are and what you've become. But your only answer to get rid of that is to numb yourself away from that feeling. So it is this vicious cycle. I have all this guilt and shame about who I am, yet it comes back around to how do you deal with it? And this was my only answer. I couldn't tell anybody, right? I couldn't allow anybody, not only am I an awful football player, but I'm a drug addict now. That's the worst possible thing. I have no money. That was the worst possible thing, right? Because I was so hooked on the idea that rich and famous was the answer. That was success. And so I would look at myself in the mirror every single night, and I was the only one I was honest with ever, right? I'd look at myself and go, oh, you junkie. You need help. Get some help. Somebody please help me. And my higher power listened and saw and sent many different versions of help along the way, and I just never saw it or was unwilling to accept it. And my way to get pills was to go to people's homes, friends of mine that I hadn't seen in years, pretend I was interested in spending some time with them, excuse myself to the restroom, and 9 times out of 10, I'd find some sort of pain-killing medication in their medicine cabinets. And I was dumbfounded when I would find a pill bottle with a prescription for 30 and only 2 pills taken, and they're like a year old. I was like, what's wrong with these people, right? 30 pills are gone in 3 days for me. Didn't make sense, but I was incredibly grateful for this. To ultimately, at the end of it all, skulking around my hometown, the outskirts of town, knocking on doors, seeing if somebody was home. If nobody was and the door was unlocked, I'd let myself in and I'd burglarize the place. Luckily for me, I'm an incredibly poor criminal, not stealthy. I'm 6'7", 250 pounds, and I did it in broad daylight most of the time. And luckily for me, many of those nights that I clamored for help from my higher power finally said, Ryan, you don't get it, dude. So I'm going to send the sheriff's department to help you. And that's what happened. March 30th, 2012, the sheriff's department showed up and would arrest me for burglary and possession of a controlled substance. And I would spend the next 32 months of my life in prison. Now, this will put to the test exactly what I said about being a drug addict long before I ever took a drug, simply because the substance was removed from my system, right? But nothing changed. In fact, it got worse. I became more judgmental, more fearful, more angry. I didn't do anything to improve my situation at all. In fact, I looked at it as a relief. I was no longer a nuisance to my community, to my family, anything. There wasn't a responsibility for me other than to sit on my ass, get fat, and die. That's what I was hoping for. The place is not a deterrent, right? I had a 13-inch flat screen at the end of my bed with the NFL Red Zone in the fall. I didn't have to treat anybody well or care. It may have been the most selfish act on my part, because I could have been out if I would have chose a diversion treatment program in about 6 months. Instead, I stayed there for 32. And my parents were trying to get their eldest son out. They never wanted a famous football playing son. They just wanted somebody who was healthy and happy and live a good life. And they were watching me just crash and burn it constantly. And they took the brunt of it, staying in that small town that I grew up with. Who were these kids? Who was this kid's parents? When, of course, we all know that it's not how your parents do it. They can do everything they possibly can to be helpful or be destructive. It's the choices I made. It was absolutely the choices I made. And there was zero accountability on my part for forever. And as I sat in that prison cell and just hoped eventually to die, my higher power thankfully showed up in the form of my roommate this time. He was an Afghan-Iraqi war veteran. He had done something I think a lot of us have probably done at some point in our lives, and that's drive drunk. And it just so happened that he would kill somebody that night. And he'd been in there since he was 23. He was on leave from a tour in Afghanistan, and he'd been in there for 8 years, and I watched him not be resolute with that version of himself. He made amends for what he had done, and he tried to better himself every single day, and I just thought he was an idiot. Look at us. We're in a prison. You know, my judge told me flat out, Ryan, you have no value to society. I'm going to give you a number and warehouse you. And that's exactly what it was. And that's exactly who I felt like. And I watched this person try to better himself in a place where it was the most miserable possible place you can be. And I thought, what an idiot. And finally, one day he felt comfortable enough, I guess, to confront me. And he said, Ryan, you don't understand the value that you have, not only for the men in there, but for when you get out. Because you're going to get out at some point. I may never. He said, you have to get your head out of the sand, and I want you to come with me down to the prison library and help prisoners who don't know how to read learn how to read. Now, I've had many of those come to Jesus moments in my life. Coaches, mentors, family, and I just told them to go to hell. I got it, right? I have all the answers. I'll figure it out. I'm not weak. That's what weak men do. But for whatever reason, I acquiesced, and I went. I went begrudgingly still. I remember walking down that prison hallway in my red jumpsuit, still kind of complaining and metaphorically kicking rocks with my feet, thinking this is stupid, this isn't going to help me, doesn't he know how important I am? And now the irony of the guy in the red jumpsuit in a prison hallway thinking he's still important is the most asinine thing you can imagine, but it was exactly what I thought of myself. And I walked into that room, and there were 50-year-old men in a place where you're supposed to show zero vulnerability because it can get you hurt or killed or whatever, come up to me and say, Ryan, I need some help. I can't read. Can you help me? And like I told you before, I'd never heard another person, especially a man, ever say that. How is that possible, especially in a place like this? And well, it turns out to be two individuals, two flawed human beings, essentially in that moment trying to be better together in the most adverse of conditions, helping one another. And that's how it started. But it's like anything, it's about practice. You don't go to the gym one day and then the next day you wake up and look in the mirror and you look like The Rock, right? It's about commitment, it's about consistency, it's about showing up, and so that's what I did. And 1 week passed, and another week, and then another week, and I realized I was sleeping better. I was more personable. I was talking to family. I hadn't gone outside the entirety of my stay. I ended up going outside twice in the 32 months that I was in prison. I rarely talked to family. I was not personable to anybody or anything. And that started to shift and started to change. And what I come to realize is that I was being of service to another human being for the first time in my life. I used to think what I did on Saturdays and Sundays was me being of service. What an awful, silly concept. And months passed, and now I was the substance abuse counselor's TA, helping guys. And I knew this was going to have to be the foundation of who I was when I got out, or like nothing would change. I would quickly come back or quickly be in the morgue. That's just the way it goes. There's no third direction. And so when I walked out of prison, December 3rd, 2014, it's not like this was 20 years ago, everybody. I had absolutely nothing, right? I didn't have a dime to my name. I didn't have the Disney Corporation, who I'm employed by now, at the door saying, here, Ryan, here's a job. My credit score was like 500. No prospects. Women weren't lined up around the block to date me. The only thing I had going for me was that my mom and dad, who I'd put through hell, unconditionally cared for me, and always have. Like I said, they did not need or want a famous football playing son. And they had a couch. And that's something that a lot of people don't have when they walk out of prisons. They don't have a safe place to start to try to get better. I was placed on parole, and I knew that I needed treatment. I knew it. I didn't get it while I was in there. It's very difficult to rehabilitate in a place where there isn't any rehabilitation. And so when I walked into my parole officer's office and said, I'd like to go to treatment, he looked at me like I was insane. No one leaves an institution and then immediately wants to go into another institution. He didn't understand that, that once you've decided that that's the way, the only way, and have accepted and surrendered, that's the only way. But instead, he denied that and said no. And so I was stuck in that hometown, living on my parents' couch, which does nothing for a 35-year-old's ego, and had to make his way through it, figure out what you were going to do, how I was going to get about, how I was going to improve that self-esteem and build my life. And sure enough, I would be tested right away at Christmas. I was at mom and dad's, my grandparents. And I opened up his cabinet for a glass, and right there was a pill bottle of opiates. And in perfect drug-seeking behavior, I didn't tell anybody. I just locked it away, knowing that, okay, there's pills there. If I need them, I know where to go back and get them. So I handled it completely poorly. The only thing that I did right in that moment is I didn't take them. So easily could have. Been about 30 days since I'd been out. Nothing had improved. My local hometown newspaper had a cartoon the day I got out that said, everybody lock up your medicine cabinets, Ryan Leaf's out of jail. Of course, anytime I mess up or anytime there's a news story, it's on every news channel. You saw the video. There is a collage of what that looks like when I mess up. Incredibly grateful for that, because I probably wouldn't be here if I hadn't been shown the light at all times, and consequences were dear for me. There are so many that deal with what I dealt with on a daily basis that do it in the shadows, and they're just gone. And the understanding of how every human life is precious regardless of what you did, who you are, or anything like that. And so for those 30 days, I was just a mess, trying to figure it out every day. But what I did is sometimes I had to go about my business for 60 seconds, and then another 60 seconds, and then an hour had passed, and then the day, and then I'd wake up the next morning and do the same thing. And I started building days, and what I started to find when I wasn't able to go to treatment was to contribute the way I did while I was in prison. I didn't have anything when I walked out of there. I had hope, and I think that's what sustained me, because of what I'd done in there. And hope is a very powerful thing, something that I didn't have for a long, long time. So I started going down to the mission and the soup kitchen and helping out that way, and then I went into my storage facility. I was sponsored by Nike and endorsed by Nike for a long time, and I had boxes and boxes of clothes that I also thought what made you important, with the gear that you wore and everything like that, the shoes. And I remember taking those boxes out and going down to the mission and handing them to all these homeless and people in need. And I remember thinking to myself, like if you were in Great Falls, Montana in the winter of 2014, early 2015, like you saw the best swagged out homeless people, and I gave that all away. And that kept that in tune, and I didn't think about those pills down at Grandpa's house anymore. And a few months passed, and my PO looked at me and said, I'm willing to allow you to go to treatment now. I don't know why. Maybe he'd just seen some evidentiary proof over the last few months, but incredibly grateful. My dad took me to treatment again for the third time in my life, and he dropped me off on March 3rd, 2015, and that's when I really think the journey started. People who go to treatment either are all in or all out. I mean, there's really not an in-between. Sometimes you fake it till you make it, but if you're ready, you'll surrender and accept whatever is coming. My best thinking took me to a prison cell. I needed help. I needed somebody to guide me. I needed many people to guide me, and that's where it started. I spent 90 days in treatment. I applied for a job at a sober living home where I would be a driver and a house manager to those who were new to recovery. And when I was offered the job, I was told that it paid $15 an hour. Now, the only reason I tell you this is because I was making $5 million a year and was just miserable. Was a miserable person to be around everything. I had just been offered this job for $15 an hour and felt more value than I'd ever felt in my life. So how was that possible? Those ideals that I thought were success, the money, the power, prestige, were completely flipped on their ear. And if there's anything you take away from today and apply them to your life, I can honestly tell you that these three things have changed mine. It has made my life something that I only thought of in my dreams. The peace, the serenity. The first one is accountability. I talked about that a little bit earlier. I was never accountable to anybody or anything my whole life. I blamed the media, the NFL, my hometown, my family, everybody, the doctors, the judge, the cops, all of it. Like, it was never my fault. And I always surrounded myself with people that told me, Ryan, it's not your fault, you're the victim here. And when that moment came where I walked by my mirror in the prison cell and said, Ryan, you're here because of what you've done, nobody else, that shifted my perspective completely, because as human beings, we make things incredibly complicated. And this is relatively simple, right? I'm here because of what I've done. Nobody else, and I have to fix it with the choices that I make. And now I can never blame anybody on anything because of that. So-and-so said this, did this, showed me this, treated me like this. My answer always to those people are like, well, what does that have to do with you? And I look back to the worst moments in my life and the things that derailed my career, and it was because of how I dealt with stuff, how I dealt with the problem, how I chose to take the unhealthy, toxic route rather than the positive and healthy one. That's accountability for me. And just because I'm up here speaking with you and I'm almost 10 years sober doesn't mean I have any of this figured out, okay? I am a new dad. I mess up every single day. I'm terrible at communication. I see a therapist all the time to try to improve that with my significant other. It's still a mess. And I think one of the hardest parts in all of this, in the accountability piece, is that once you admit to or talk publicly about your substance abuse issue or your mental health issue, people see you working at it, that you're addressing it. And then it's almost like they forget that you are still living with that mental health issue. Like it's fixed, but you're still a work in progress every single day. So when you continue to mess up, like we all do as flawed human beings, trying to be better every single day, people look at you and judge you again, and you have to be diligent about how you respond to that and how you deal with it. And what other people think of you is none of your business. That is the best affirmation my therapist gave me. And that fits into the accountability piece of it all. The second thing is spirituality. There was a joke that Sports Illustrated went with when I was going into the NFL. It went, what's the difference between God and Ryan Leaf? And the punchline is that God doesn't think he's Ryan Leaf. And I thought that was hilarious. Now there's something about walking into a stadium of 100,000 people and moving your hands just like that and getting a reception. There's a godlike feeling to that. It's incredibly silly and untrue. I'm not incredibly religious. I kind of steal all the good parts from all the religions. I'm spiritual in nature. There's no reason why I should be up here talking to any of you right now. I've had many friends of mine who are no longer here, and I deal with a ton of survivor's guilt on why I'm the one. So there's a bigger purpose for me. There's something guiding that. And the many times that my higher power showcased that, the best way for me to put it is that I know there is a God and I'm not it. That's the best way I can express my spirituality to you. And the fact that I'm in a community in Indiana telling my story, that's spiritual. The third thing is community, and I started the talk with this. When I grew up, I was never part of my community. I was raised above it and then thought I was above it all. The closest I came to a real community was in college. We were all the same. We were all the best athletes from our schools, and we were working towards a common goal. But that eventually even started to rise, and I became known as a great quarterback and all of these things that went with it. So I was never truly part of that community. And certainly down the line when I was in the NFL, I just thought I was better than everybody else. Never part of that community. When I was at my deepest lows, like, there wasn't a community either. I didn't have a drug dealer. I didn't have friends who I used with. Like, my high was my high. I wasn't going to waste that on anybody, right? I wanted it all to myself. It was like a woman that I would date, right? This drug was more important, so I was not a part of a community. And certainly when I was at the very bottom in the gutter, there was no community to be a part of. So I live in Los Angeles right now, and there are an unbelievable recovery community, 2,500 meetings a week, mental health services. The stigma just does not exist in Los Angeles. And I've planted myself right in the middle of it, and I'm not going to get picked off. And then that community gets to grow and widen more because I get asked to do stuff like this and travel and meet people like Meridian and what they try to contribute and do to change and be part of the solution within their communities. That is spiritual. That now I am part of the state of Indiana's community. And ironically enough, it being Peyton Manning country, I've spoken here in the state of Indiana more than any other state in the country. This is my 8th time to Indiana over the last 5 years. That's incredibly welcoming. I'll text him and tell him that I'm in this part of the country and everything like that, and he'll give me some suggestions in Indianapolis to go eat and things like that. And I said, I'm more liked in Indiana than you are, by the way. His text to me the other day was, you have a better story. Storytelling can be so huge. If one of you came up here and told your story, it would be incredibly impactful, just as impactful, if not more, simply because everybody who's overcome adversity and who's still standing, who still continues to get back up, is impactful. Remember that. A lot of times when people talk about being of service to others, they think about things that I said a little bit earlier, donating money and your time, things like that. But realistically, if you sat down with somebody who's struggling or going through something that they can relate to with you, that you've been through, and you simply tell them your story, that may be the most impactful opportunity to be of service than anything else you can do. I've seen it change lives. It's changed my life. All those things I talked about when I walked out of prison that I didn't have, in these last 7 years have just changed dramatically. Right? I was never a person who respected women. I saw them as objects. I had never had any sort of intimacy at all. And I met this woman about 6 months out of prison. And because of the shift and change in how I went about things with people and how I viewed it in perspective, this relationship actually had a chance, right? Because I saw her as somebody more than just an object, and the intimacy that grew from that has grown into a child and a true relationship. Not that we don't struggle all the time, right? We see a couple therapists, not because we have problems, but because I'm a horrible communicator. I'm sure she wishes I could stand in front of her like I stand in front of a microphone and talk for an hour about my feelings and things like that, but I'm not good at that. we have a wonderful child. The job I talked about, if I'd have told you 7 years ago that I would be working for the Disney Corporation, I would have told you you were nuts. How is that possible? And that I'd get to travel the country and speak my truth and my story to communities that are trying to be part of the solution. None of that exists without the 180-degree lifestyle change and what was given me. I never thought I'd be able to stand in front of a group full of people and tell them how grateful I was for having spent 32 months in prison. I don't recommend it. I am extremely grateful for it. Before I leave here, I always talk about choice. And no matter what, you always have the option when you hit a fork in the road, regardless of how big the choice can be. You're going to deal with it in a healthy, positive way or a negative and toxic one. It's entirely up to you. Some things are really small, and some choices are really big. But like practice, preparing for a game, if you are not able to do the little things all the time, when that big moment, when that big choice comes, you won't be able to do it. You think you will because they're huge choices. But if you're not prepared, if you haven't practiced, example, I use a Q-tip in my ear when I clean it out after a shower to dry it out, and I throw it at the trash can, and 9 times out of 10 it goes in. I'm accurate. Played in the NFL. But when that would not go in and would hit the ground, I think the majority of the time my eyes would go back to the mirror, and I'd go about my business, and I just thought maybe I was entitled to have somebody pick up after me. Real small. And one day, finally, when I did it, I went over and picked it up, and I put it in the trash can, and what a small, minuscule choice of doing the next right thing. But what a great example of tiny choices, right? Because I guarantee you, if the 18-year-old version of me is standing outside my body of the 36-year-old version of me standing outside of a house trying to make the decision on whether or not to go in and break into it and steal pills for the first time, I know the 18-year-old version of me is going, that is not going to be me, right? I'm going to be a guy that plays 18 to 20 years in the NFL, wins Super Bowls, right? Marries a supermodel, does Old Spice commercials. That's the life for me. That's Tom Brady, by the way. But because of that, because of whatever age, 13 or 18, from that moment to that moment there, I wasn't doing the little things. I wasn't making the little right choices. And so when that opportunity presented itself, there wasn't even a choice. It was just, boom. Life irreparably changed. But it doesn't mean you're going to make the right choices all the time, because I talked about the flawed human nature of all of this. Just this morning, I took the shower before I came here, and I cleaned my ear out, and I missed the trash can, and my eyes went back to the mirror immediately, and I just caught myself, and I went, dude, you talk about this all the time. You're going to go talk about this an hour from now. Go pick up the damn Q-tip. And so I did. And so my day started. And we're here now. And today, you all got up and made a conscious choice when that fork in the road happened of going to be part of your community, to make a positive change and try to be part of the solution. Meridian has led the way, and you followed in suit and want to be part of your community, because this epidemic, this pandemic, all of it has put people to a test that our generations have not seen for, I don't think since the late 70s, early 80s, to be honest, right? So it's the first time for me in an understanding. So I commend you all for being here and choosing the positive and healthy path today. Tomorrow you may choose a different path, and you will make amends for that and go about it the best way you can as that flawed human being trying to be better every single day. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to be of service. I want to thank you for the opportunity of being welcoming and making me a part of your community today. So thank you very much.
We do have quite the distinguished panel today, and lots of people that are going to be up here and can answer. We've got a lot of questions for them, and pointed questions about what they do and how what they do affects our community and all the communities around that Meridian Health Services. In no particular order, we'd like to welcome Dr. Eric Brandenstein from Reed Health. Also, Doug Hunsinger, Executive Director for Drug Prevention and Treatment and Enforcement, the Office of Governor Eric Holcomb, and he's also known as our Drug Czar of Indiana. Judge from Superior Court 3, Darren Dolahanty. Dr. Brad Barrett, District 56 State Representative. Christine Simpson, Executive Director for the Wayne County Health Department. Megan Huffmeyer, CERT Project Manager, Choices Coordinated Care Solutions. Lisa Suttle, Regional Vice President, Meridian Health Services. And of course, the esteemed Mayor Dave Snow. So, without any particular order, we're just going to start and find out some of the answers that, some questions that a lot of people ask with regards to what happens with drug treatment in and around Richmond and Wayne County and the entire service area of Meridian Health Services. So, let's start with, tell you what, let's start with Doug Hunsinger. We'll start with you, Doug. So, under the heading of prevention, treatment, and enforcement, what are some of the actions that your office is taking?
Yeah, so first and foremost, our office is really there to coordinate the state's response to the addiction epidemic. And illegal and illicit fentanyl is what's driving our overdoses and overdose deaths right now around the state. And so since May of 2020, we have increased the amount of naloxone by 70,000 doses through our partner at Overdose Lifeline and our Department of Health. We've also invested $4 million during this time to increase the availability of naloxone, and we've installed 430 nalox boxes. These are boxes that are placed in communities so that there's no barrier to access to naloxone at any time. In a couple weeks, we'll be announcing outreach teams. These are teams that look a little different in every community. It allows for groups to go out and hit hotspots, follow up on overdoses, work with our jails and our Department of Corrections in helping that reentry piece. But again, all of these services are really tailored around what the needs of the community are. And that's what's really important, is that our office is providing the resources and the funding so that communities can really tackle this at the local level. Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Let's talk to Dr. Eric Brandenstein from Reed Health. So Dr. Brandenstein, I know we talked briefly, it was in, I know that Jerry had mentioned about the NEST program that is new between Reed and Meridian Health Services. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
I would love to talk to you about the NEST. So the NEST is a maternal treatment program, and our focus is targeted on pregnant women and women in the postpartum period who have been struggling with substance abuse. NEST actually stands for Nurturing, Empowering, Sustaining, and Thriving, and that's what we help women do. And I really appreciate Ryan Leaf telling his story because it told so much about the cycle of addiction. You know, he talked about mental illness and, depression and self-medicating. And he talked about hope and needing a safe place to recover. And oftentimes addiction is multifaceted. And a lot of times there's mental health issues. There's the issue of needing good prenatal care for mom and baby. There's socioeconomic issues. There's other social issues that need to be addressed. And we can actually do that all at the NEST. So at the NEST, we treat pregnant women. They can get their prenatal care there. They can get medical assisted therapy, meaning that if they have an addiction to opiates, they can get started on medication to treat that. And it's been well proven that women who are on medication during pregnancy are more likely to be well, to continue into prenatal care, to have healthy babies at full term, to stay in treatment. They're less likely to be exposed to dangerous diseases that can affect the baby, like hepatitis C and HIV, and they're much less likely to relapse and overdose. And so we encourage, and also withdrawal with baby in the womb can result in miscarriage or stillbirth. So we are able to start patients on medical therapy as well. And then through Meridian, they can get their psychiatric care, individual care, group therapy. We have navigation that can help them with any socioeconomic issues. We're going to provide education on childbirthing and infant CPR. We have it looks like a house. I mean, women can bring their kids there. There's a little nursery there, the little play area for kids there. There's a little shop where women can earn points and get items for their baby. It's supposed to feel like a family, like a home, a safe place to recover, like Mr. Leaf was talking about. And so that's really what the Nest is providing for women, is just everything they need in one place to give them that hope for recovery.
Okay. Well, actually, while we're still speaking of maternal recovery, so can you tell us about neonatal abstinence syndrome and how does that affect mothers here in Wayne County?
Of course, I'd love to talk to you about that. So neonatal abstinence syndrome is basically an illness or symptoms that babies suffer from when their mother has been addicted while they have been in the womb. So it's the symptoms that can affect baby after birth. Most of the time it involves addiction to opiates. And for the babies, it can involve issues with feeding, jitteriness, agitation on the minor end. And on the more severe end, it can involve seizures. Babies that are exposed to illicit substances in the womb, studies have shown, can sometimes have more long-term issues as well. And so neonatal abstinence syndrome is basically just that syndrome that encompasses what infants might suffer from after birth, and there is a treatment protocol for that. I can tell you that through the Nest, when we get women in consistent therapy and when we get women particularly on medication-assisted therapy, the babies are much, much less likely to suffer from neonatal abstinence syndrome. And I can tell you just from personal experience, my women that have been in treatment generally will be able to take their baby home within 5 days and have their kids do great. So.
Wow, that's great. Mm-hmm. Megan Huffmeyer. So let's talk a little bit about CERT and what CERT does in and around the community.
Yes. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So Choices CERT, CERT stands for Choices Emergency Response Team, and we are a team of specialists available 24/7 to the community to assist individuals and families with services for substance use and mental health. So the unique thing about us is that we do have peer recovery coaches that work for us, and we'll go out into the community, whether it's after an overdose call. So we're partnering with law enforcement, EMS, the hospital may call us. Anyone can make a referral at any time to refer someone that is struggling. And so we really meet them where they're at. It is client-centered, and the goal for us is just to show up. So when someone is diagnosed with cancer or someone has diabetes, we show up. We give them a get well soon card. And so for us, we want to show up. And that's the biggest thing for us, is to build that relationship and meet them where they are. They don't have to know what they want. So when we go out there, we say, what can we do for you? What do you need? And understanding that before someone can commit to recovery, they have to have those basic needs met. So linking them to services for housing, transportation, groceries, things like that, just helping them navigate that so that it's a minute-by-minute thing, kind of like Ryan talked about. How am I supposed to see the bigger future when I don't have my basic needs met? And so that's what we try to do. And then with that, linking them to their preferred route of treatment, because there is no way, like one way to recover. There is no cookie cutter intervention. And so we let them make that choice, and we guide them through that process, following up to help them get through those barriers that come up as we all face every day. So something happens, they can't find childcare, they can't find transportation, all those things that come up, we help them navigate, whether it's they're calling for an inpatient treatment facility and that person doesn't take them or their insurance isn't covered under there. We take care of all those things so that they can focus on the next day or the next minute.
Excellent, thank you. So basically CERT bridges the gap for addicts and recovery. Excellent. Lisa Suttle, since you're next. Yeah. So Meridian Health Services obviously does everything for the whole person. They do medical and dental and everything else. But what else has Meridian been doing to help address opioids and other drug abuse in their service area?
Sure. Can you hear me okay? I think so. I'm going to start out from the very beginning. We have a school-based health center clinic, and we do a lot of prevention services within that area. That's really where it starts with a lot of things, making sure that we're getting to those kids and those families. We do a lot of outpatient services. We do the intakes, the intensive outpatient treatment, maternal treatment program. We talked about that specifically, and I was so glad and proud to be a part of that when it first started here in Wayne County. But we have opened 2 others too as well, and are looking at one in Newcastle. So it's really expanding throughout the state. Jerry gave an excellent review of what we're doing in Wayne County in different areas, but across the state we're in 33 counties, and we just are expanding tremendously with our addiction services. With the hit of COVID, of course, the virtual services really got us pushing out with what we could do. I tell everybody if we'd had to do that, it took us 5 years, definitely. We did it in about 6 months of being able to turn that around and get services out, so it's been really nice. Residential services, as Jerry talked about, the ARC programs, is big for us. We opened a women's recovery home in Delaware County last year in September. In that home, it's 10 beds. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful where they come to. But they can bring their babies too, up to 3 months in that location. And it's really important to us that they have that bonding period, that doesn't stop in any way. So we get a lot of referrals from DCS, from probation, other areas. We're looking to expand that service too throughout the state. We're opening some new services in Lafayette. And again, our services are available throughout the counties in the state. We can do so many things virtual now. It's very important with our partnerships that we continue to do that, because Meridian can't do it alone. We have to partner with other hospitals, other agencies. Everybody brings something to the table, and nobody can do it alone. So we partner with Reed, Community, Ball, hospitals, DCS, the health departments, always working on those things. So again, I probably answer my next question too, but it is about the whole person. If we're not looking at everything that's going on with that person, then we miss the boat. And with our women's recovery home, that's the first thing we do is assess them for everything that's going on with them. I'm a nurse background, so it's head to toe. What's going on with the patient all together. We got them there right then, so we capture everything that we can and throw it at them. So it's about their kids that they have, getting pediatric services for them. It's about dental services. It's about their health. It's about all of those things, and just really being able to help them. So relationship-based care, patient-centered is what we focus on. So,
okay,
thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So let's tell you what. Okay, so we'll just stay right down the line. So Christine Stinson from Wayne County Health Department. So Christine, obviously you've been, I know, on the leading edge with all the COVID and pandemic and whatnot. But going back to what the Wayne County Health Department has originally been dealing with the longest has been obviously drug addiction and drug abuse. And what are some of the things going on with the health department to help battle drug abuse in Wayne County?
Okay, yeah. And just because we were dealing with COVID, when COVID hit, it doesn't mean that we threw our hands up and quit dealing with the opioid crisis.
Sure.
That hit. Actually, we expanded services as we were dealing with the COVID. So we have a harm reduction program here in Wayne County, and we're actually expanding services. So we went from having one site for harm reduction to having 3 sites, and that was a lot with our ability to partner with Meridian Services. We brought Meridian in with our harm reduction, so they are there hand in hand with us every time we offer our needle exchange. Meridian is there. That's the first question we ask someone when they come to our harm reduction program is, are you ready for treatment? We like to meet people where they're at. I think that's one thing that is incredibly important when we do our program, is that we're meeting them where they're at. If you're not meeting them where they're at, they're not going to be able to go on into treatment. If you're shoving them into treatment, it's never going to work. So we're there to meet them where they're at. If they're ready for treatment, we get them a bed. Meridian is right there to get them where they need to be. If the answer is yes, they're ready to go into treatment. If the answer is no, then we move them in through their program. But the health department, you know, our program, you know, through harm reduction is needed in Wayne County. Unfortunately, we have a county in the state that is very high for drug use. We increased our participation by 80% in the past 2 years and have increased our intake of needles by 300%. Now, a lot of that is because we were able to expand our services. So, you know, when you expand services, of course, you're going to, you know, increase how much you're able to take in. But we also were able to, I know the gentleman down there was talking about the need for the Narcan. So we did participate in the Narcan program for the first time in Wayne County. And since that, we got that in May of 2020. And since then, we have distributed 1,000 Narcan kits in Wayne County. So we're really proud about that, and that's something to say in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, to be able to have those kind of life-saving kits out in the community, and very needed, unfortunately, in Wayne County. We want to get more and more people into treatment in Wayne County.
Yeah, because unfortunately, I think being in lockdown for as long as we were, sometimes that tends to lead people to their sort of their darkest areas. They're there, there's isolation, there's a lot of things involved where they don't get out, they don't socialize, and therefore you're kind of left to your own devices, whether those be good or bad.
I absolutely agree. The COVID was very, very difficult. Led to a lot of isolation, led to a lot of people out of work, led to a lot of, you know, dark times for a lot of people. And I do believe that led to a lot of people, whether it was, you know, alcoholism or drug use, it led to people choosing those type of behaviors if you had been prone to those. Some people did choose to go back down those darker pathways.
True.
But hopefully, with places like Meridian and treatment, people will choose those pathways, because I agree with what Ryan said. These are choices that we make. And when we make bad choices, we can always choose to make a better choice tomorrow, today, at the next hour. You know, we can make better choices and choose to take the different path. And, you know, we talk to our participants. There are very, very difficult choices people have to make, and very, very dark paths that people walk. But like I said, we meet people where they're at, and sometimes, you know, they're just needing, you know, we're meeting people that need a pair of socks, you know, in the middle of winter. We're meeting people that need gloves, and you know, they're choosing their drug and a pair of socks.
Right.
So it's some very sad stories, and we're glad to be partners with Meridian there, so we can hopefully, you know, get them to choose to go into treatment.
Well, kind of sort of based off of what Christine was just talking about. So Judge Darren Dolahanty, let's talk with you for a second. So I know that with the incidents of drug use in Wayne County and enrichment and whatnot, how have you seen that affect the court system?
Every day, Rick. Before I get directly to your question, don't let me get too far off track, please. I've never met a microphone I didn't love. My wife and I are sitting over there having lunch today with some old friends, great people. and you don't get to see the whole room. When you're up here, you get to see the whole room, which is pretty cool, actually. And there's some real superstars here today that will never be recognized. They are the people that are in recovery or trying to get to recovery, trying mightily and struggling. Some days they're doing great, some days they're not. Or they're heading that way and they need a pull or perhaps a push or somebody to walk right next to them. So those people know who they are in the room, and you are my heroes. Rick won't tell you this, but he softballed me a question there and actually let me know in advance, this is what I'm going to ask you, Dolahanty.
You're welcome, by the way.
Yeah. When I get into court in the morning, to the courthouse in the morning, it's usually still dark and there's plenty of emails to read through, but we get an email sent to us from the jail control system, whatever the heck it's called. I don't care about the magic. I just know the magic works, and this message shows up in my inbox that I get to read. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to unabashedly use today as a sample of what our community looks like. The 26 people most recently arrested in our community, not somebody else's, right? Our community. These are their offenses. I won't give you their names. Possession of a syringe, petition to revoke probation, dug into that one a little. It was for noncompliance with substance abuse or substance use counseling. Battery on a police officer for a person who was also arrested for public intoxication on drugs. Possession of cocaine. Failure to appear for a hearing on operating while intoxicated. A battery on a police officer, which actually occurred at the jail, the inmate being incarcerated for possession of methamphetamine. OWI. OWI on drugs, operating while intoxicated, is OWI. Disorderly conduct, a failure to appear for hearing on possession of methamphetamine and drug paraphernalia, operating while intoxicated, possession of methamphetamine, possession of methamphetamine. These are different people, not the same person over and over. Robbery, possession of a controlled substance, paraphernalia and marijuana, theft, battery, theft, OWI, public intoxication, OWI, battery, OWI, 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 and possession of cocaine. Now, if you cannot understand the amazingly huge impact that substance use disorders have on our community, as well as other communities, but our community, there's your proof. That is a snapshot of today with no editing by the judge. Right? So that's what we are dealing with in our court system. You don't have to look any further than that. If you want a good answer, you might want to look beyond just our jail population. Substance use disorders drive many other parts of our docket in the court system, Rick, in ways that people may not necessarily understand at first. Divorce filings. Think about the impact on substance use disorders and the stability of families. Landlord-tenant filings for eviction. The zip code that many of you recognize because you put it on your letters every day, 47374. That's us. That's our community. The zip code 47374 has the highest number of eviction filings for any zip code in the state of Indiana outside of Indianapolis.
Wow.
That's us. Of great impact on my own court, the number of children removed from homes as what we call in the court system children in need of services. We had a great discussion at dinner last night that the better acronym instead of CHINS would be PINS, because it's almost always the parents that are in need of services, not the children. But this is what we call them in the court system nonetheless. Our court practices and our allocation of resources have to change as a direct result of the number of substance use disorder related cases and filings and lawsuits that we see in our community right here. We've recently started a family recovery court. our county's first problem-solving court. So a lot of the people that made that happen are here, including people from Meridian, people from probation, service providers, CASAs, Department of Child Service people. This is the team that makes this happen. But it's our first problem-solving court following the National Association of Drug Court Professionals' 10 key components and best practice standards. Those are our Bibles for problem-solving courts. And our recovery court, if you're interested, I love it. It's the toughest damn thing I've done as a judge. It's the most rewarding thing I've done as a judge. So figure that out. But we're scheduled for accreditation. Is that the word, Emily? Certification. Thank you. The directors are back there. Certification next month. Fingers crossed there. But again, thanks again to our partners with Meridian for helping us make that happen. And as we're seeing, Rick, the power of this type of a problem-solving court based on the drug court model, my probation officers, many of them here, are driving me towards putting together more problem-solving courts, including OWI court. You might have noticed that there is a need for something in our county to address that problem, as well as an adult drug court, because these are such powerful things. So it does impact everybody's community. I get that, Rick, but I think it's a very important message today to let you all know how it's impacting our community as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good answer. Mayor Dave Snow. So I know you work closely with first responders, RPD, fire, RFD, and whatnot. How have you seen the effects on them?
Well, the effects on our first responders are pretty vast and multi-layered. From a personal level, we see a lot of them that suffer from the emotional stress of seeing people that they grew up with in these situations. And it really hits them pretty hard. We talk to them frequently about what they see. From their responsibility point of view, the city's in a unique position because the city does not have a judicial branch. The city is not over the county jail, so the city does not oversee the court system or the jail system, and we don't have an arm of mental or public health. So our biggest piece in this issue is our police department, who typically work on the reactionary side of a drug issue. They are out there trying to remove the drugs from the streets. And they are often caught in the middle of trying to do that job while also dealing with people who are in heavy mental stress from how they, from the life they've lived and getting into that position. And so we talk about some of the statistics that our police department has documented this year alone. Because they do have a job to do in removing the drugs from the streets and removing the supply of the drugs from the neighborhoods. They have made over 500 arrests this year, drug-related, and the majority of those have been meth, heroin, or fentanyl and heroin combined. That's been the majority of those arrests. They have closed, in conjunction with the Wayne County Drug Task Force, they have closed 14 drug houses this year. Now, I share those statistics, and that's a lot of work that our police department has done, but our chief of police, all of us would sit here and tell you it's not an issue that we can arrest our way out of. We can't. We have a job to do to remove those drugs from the streets, but just continuing the arrests won't bring the solution. So we've made huge investments in our police department to also have a positive impact on the other side of this, on the human side. We've grown our department back to its full force, which it hasn't been in many, many years. We've resurrected our juvenile division, so now our police officers are having positive interactions with kids, and that's making a big difference. We have cut our juvenile arrests down more than half of what they used to be. We have also, and that's all in partnership, and I'm going to get to the partnership piece here in a minute, but we've also tried to increase our police outreach, putting our officers out in the community. Unfortunately, COVID brought an abrupt halt to all of those initiatives. We couldn't afford to put our police out in a pandemic because we had to mitigate the spread of illness within the department. We only have so many officers. So you'll see those things coming back hopefully next year as we turn a big positive corner with COVID. We have our neighborhoods department, and I started a neighborhoods initiative where we're providing mini grants to neighborhoods because we really believe that the real fight is in our neighborhoods. If we can empower and embolden our neighborhoods to be unified and be together, then we can really see some positive progress in an addiction crisis. And then just the quality of place initiatives that we're able to lead with our Parks Department and our green space, because that gives people positive spaces to gather and positive places to be. Also working on that human side with our first responders, we've put a tremendous amount of work into a partnership with the state health department that we'll hopefully be announcing very soon, where you'll see a paramedicine program within our police and fire department that's really going to help people and make for a warmer handoff when people are suffering mental health issues. And a big thanks to Hollywood, who is here with us today, who's put a tremendous amount of work into that. And then as I look around this room, I see just dozens of partners and people that I work with regularly, and I think you do too. I'm not alone in that. I see Corey George sitting here from our probation department, who does a tremendous amount of work and has worked with Josh Amix and Stephanie Baker at RCS to lead the Handle with Care program, because we're learning so much about trauma-informed care and what that means in fostering better lifestyles for people. So, I'll just go back to saying, we can't arrest our way out of the problem, but we can connect, engage, learn, educate, invest, and change our way out of the problem. But it's going to take all of us continuing to work together, and this is definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, there is no short-time fix, essentially.
Correct.
Right. Well, so Dr. Brad Barrett, I know before you were a District 56 state representative, you were Dr. Brad Barrett. And so obviously you've seen, I'm sure, the ravages of drug use firsthand.
Yeah, I have. It was a very unique situation in that, having served in that role for 25 years in the community, you realized that this was a community problem. Ryan, you talked about how community was part of your solution. And we've heard the word community come up many times on this panel discussion. And so it made me realize that, number one, it's a health issue, and that's why we don't have law enforcement at this table today, although a month ago, we had Doug came over from the State House and from the governor's office, and we had a roundtable discussion with many of the same people in this room to discuss and really to show Indianapolis, what are we dealing with as a community here? And so, anyways, it gave me the firsthand exposure that this is rampant in our community, and it affects our colleagues, our coworkers, our neighbors, our friends, and it's not somebody else's problem. So then I look at my challenge at the State House now as an ability to meet within our community. 6 weeks ago, toured Meridian's new facility, or maybe it was 2 months ago. It all runs together. We had our little panel discussion a month ago. A meeting with the chamber next week to discuss what can we do. The real difference between this position I'm in now and the job I had before was the job that I had before showed instant results. Somebody had appendicitis, you took out their appendix, they didn't have appendicitis anymore. And when I'm over there in Indianapolis, it's hard to know that what we do makes a difference. The results aren't so quick and forthcoming. And yet when I sit at this table and I hear about the NEST program, I mean, that's directly out of the Department of Health study of maternal perinatal mortality. They looked, Indiana had a disproportionately high rate of maternal perinatal mortality. And it sounds horrible, but when you actually looked at the root cause analysis, it was all related to drug abuse and addiction. And if we could correct that, I think the year before I got to the State House, there was the PIN program where we started to partner with hospitals in areas of the state that were at high risk. And we're making a dent in that. We're actually seeing the needle move. And to me, it's like a 3-year wait, but wow, you can see results. And we're seeing it with syringe exchange, and we're seeing it with the Inspect program. You know, Ryan, the Inspect program is a program where we monitor prescriptions that are written in the state by doctors so that if there is an outlier that someone's shopping around, it's going to come to light. It's going to be visible. And I worked with that system in my own practice, and now it's moving electronically and fusing with the medical records, and it's working. We're seeing that we're actually limiting that vehicle for drug abuse. Paramedicine program, all a result of things that we've done at the State House. I too know the next question you're going to ask is about what we have coming, and I appreciate it as much as the others. Access to care. I think without knowing exact specifics at this point, it's how do we improve access to care, particularly in that mental health space, particularly in that drug addiction space, because the problem is escalating, the providers are either stagnant or decreasing. And so we're looking at ways to mobilize telemedicine, compacts where we can bring practitioners into the state without going through an exhaustive process, but still maintaining a high level of care and performance. So that's probably the biggest issue I see on the forefront for the upcoming legislative session. And then I'll just close by saying, this position has given me the opportunity to attend a lot of these events and hear a lot of famous people, great speakers. This ranks amongst the highest in terms of sincerity and vulnerability and speaking from the heart. I didn't see a piece of paper that you used as an outline. It was fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that. Can you imagine any of us bringing in our low light and showing it on the video? You know, hey, I want all of you to show your 10 lowest moments before we speak. It's absolutely unbelievable. I'm going to be looking for a Ryan Leaf jersey.
There's plenty of them.
Well done, by the way. So, you know, I think as we start to wrap up, there's a couple of things. I think if there's anything that you can take away from not only Ryan's talk, but also the panel that we've had, is that, you know, typically, now I know a lot of people in this room are affiliated with drug addiction and recovery, or the medical side of things, or even with, you know, other sides, law enforcement and whatnot. But there is no face to drug abuse. I think so many people get the impression that it's, you know, it's some lowlife that, you know, lives off the streets, does whatever. You know, Ryan Leaf stood up here and said, made $5 million a year at one point, and then ended up in prison because he was stealing for drugs. Like, that's not something you expect. You know, I've had family and friends that have had drug issues and whatnot. Some have made it through, and unfortunately some have not. And that's the thing that if there's anything, you know, kind of the final message I know that Meridian has tried to drive through, is that this can happen to anyone. Anyone can fall victim to addiction, and as long as you have the ability to see it through and try and find help, that's what it all comes down to. And as Ryan said many times, it's all about change. You decide the change. If you make the change, it will happen, but it's up to you. There are envelopes on your table, and events like this to try and bring the community together and focus on addiction and recovery help because of Meridian. There are envelopes you can fill out and for donations and whatnot, and it all goes to Meridian so they can have more things like this to help out the community. So for everyone on our panel, and again, one more hand for Ryan Leaf. So with that, have a great afternoon. Thank you so much for being here.